I got my buddy from Travelers. I hope he's staying warm. Craig, where are you in the world? It's 23 degrees here in Chattanooga, but it was 7 degrees in the
Yeah,
morning.
I am in Chicago, right outside of Chicago, Illinois, in Naperville, where it's a balmy 16. But that's looking up because the past few days it hasn't been above zero, so
Do you don't have any?
it's pretty chilly.
You don't have an EV, do you? There was an article in like USA Today or something yesterday that was like all the Teslas in Chicago have frozen and it's causing huge issues.
Yeah, no, I do not have an EV, but I have some folks that work with me that do, and it's not a good place to be right now. If you have an EV with a lithium ion battery, it's pretty challenging. So.
No, no, you might need a contingent. Maybe you need a nice vehicle backup. Maybe you need a second car. But if you're a broker, maybe you need contingent coverage. That's something we talked about last time you were on. Anything new here?
Yeah, no, we talked about contingent coverage and how it's a good backstop for a freight broker to have so that their shipping customer can be made whole if the trucking company who should pay for the cargo damage fails to do so. It's relatively inexpensive, so there's really little reason not to have it.
And today we have a sidebar topic to contracts, contingent coverage, what we got to do. Set the table for us, sir.
Yeah, so today's topic addresses important things that freight brokers should consider before they sign a contract, and contingent coverage happens to be one of them.
Interesting. Well, thanks to the freight brokers, though. They shouldn't. Freight brokers have to sign contracts, right? But how do they know which ones to sign?
Well, it's not news. Contracts will change the balance of who's responsible for what. So you need to understand how a contract changes your liability before you sign it. And there are a few things that you should consider.
Okay, great. Spell it out for us. What do we need to consider?
Yeah, so the first thing to remember is that there are two different kinds of coverage for freight brokers. The first is liability coverage, which covers your legal liability as a freight broker for cargo damage. And then the second is contingent coverage, which of course protects against cargo loss or damage when you aren't liable, but the liable trucking company fails to pay. And then after you remember the different kinds of coverages, you need to think about the policy in front of you, and you need to ask yourself, what's covered and what's not. Some policies don't cover certain commodities. So for example, commodities like precious metals or seafood, pharmaceuticals, these kinds of things aren't covered. So you really need to know what the commodity is that's being transported, since these commodities may require a special insurance. And then also looking at the policy, you need to ask yourself, what causes of loss are covered and what aren't covered. So things like, causes of loss like dishonest acts by the driver or theft from an unattended vehicle, or even improper setting of refrigeration thermostats. These are causes of loss that not all policies cover. And then lastly, when looking at the coverage, you need to ask yourself, does the policy only cover damage that involves a specifically listed vehicle or a specifically listed driver? You need to read your policies carefully. Check the certificate of insurance also for the trucking company's policy, which may have a clue as to this kind of information.
Sounds like a lot of responsibility. There are a lot of variables to take into consideration before you sign on the dotted line.
Looking at the coverages and the insurance policies, you need to take a look at the contract and specifically consider liability assumption, because generally, as we've spoken about before here, a broker isn't liable for cargo loss or damage because they don't actually handle the goods. They don't touch the cargo. But some contract terms might make the brokers fully liable for that damage as if they were the trucking company. And that's close to a strict liability. And another thing that's important to pay attention to in contracts, after you read carefully for liability assumption, is the distinction between minimum limits of insurance with a limitation of liability. So those are two different things, and a loss might be greater than the limit of insurance that's spelled out on the contract. And this will expose the freight broker to an unfortunate and uninsured loss. So for example, let's say we have a $200,000 cargo loss, and we only have $100,000 worth of insurance coverage that's required by the contract. And the broker in that case is then exposed to the $100,000 of uninsured loss, meaning the $100,000 beyond the limit of insurance in the contract. On the other hand, when the contract stipulates a limitation of liability of $100,000, then the broker shouldn't be responsible or liable beyond that $100,000. So it's really critical to remember when you look at a contract and understand that a contract limitation of liability is not a contract limit of insurance. It's not a limit of insurance.
Not that that wasn't enough, but is there more that freight brokers have to consider when signing a contract?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there is, but we're in the home stretch here. So the last thing you need to think about and consider before signing a contract are whether or not there are any coverage gaps. And you need to understand that contingent coverage policies aren't created equally. Unfortunately, there's not standard wording for contingent coverage policies, so you have to read them carefully to understand the triggers and limitations. For example, some policies won't provide coverage at all if a payment of any kind in any amount is made by the trucker's insurance company. So a little awareness can go a long, long way.
Yeah, better safe than sorry in this situation.
Well, exactly. And look, all this contract stuff, it sounds intimidating, but it's really not. It's just paying attention to what's in front of you, being aware of what policies and contracts are in place, and then taking stock of any potential coverage gaps. You just pause a moment, ask yourself a few questions, double check a few things before you sign anything. And it's better to do this before the shipment happens, to attempt to identify an uninsured exposure rather than trying to address these uninsured exposures after the loss occurs.
Yeah, a lot to think about there. How do people go and get more information about this?
Travelers.com is where you would go.
Craig, stay warm. Stay warm over in that windy city of Chicago. And maybe next year will be a
Yes,
good one for
sir.
your Bears. I don't think Belichick's going there.
Thank, we'll see. Thanks so
We'll
much
see.
for having me.
He might be my neighbor in Atlanta. That's the rumors. We'll see. Take it easy, sir.
Okay.
Appreciate your time today. All right, elsewhere.